So now let's dive into this new series. I'm so excited to be able to open this up, and I get to just kind of set things up, and over the next few weeks we're going to kind of unpack a few of these thoughts as we get a little bit deeper and trying to understand what it really means to follow Jesus and to be a disciple is kind of a church word we use for it. But we're going to unpack a little bit about what that means today. And I don't know if your background in church is like mine, or maybe you don't have a background in church. That's probably better than having a background in church sometimes, because my background in church was a little skewed. I don't even know where I got some of the ideas I got it from, because I know my parents did a good job of raising me and trying to teach me, but somehow I collected these just differing thoughts and opinions about what church is and what it really meant to follow Jesus. And it ended up becoming more like a game of Jesus Says. You guys know Simon Says, the game? You know, Simon Says, touch your head. Simon Says, rub your belly. Simon Says, do both at the same time. No. But church somehow became a huge game of Jesus Says to me. You know, Jesus says, do this. Jesus says, do that. Jesus says, do this. And all of a sudden you're looking over here and you see a pretty lady and somebody says, hey, Jesus did not say that. And you're like, yeah, but did you see her? And so then it's like you're out of the game, you know, you're like, until you go to like youth camp or another church service or something, and then you're back in and you get to start all over with a whole new version of Jesus Says. So that was kind of just my skewed view of church and what it meant to follow Jesus. But I want to ease your tension and your fear and tell you that that's not at all what Jesus had in mind when he said the word follow. And so today what I want to do is just talk a little bit about the simplicity of the call that Jesus gives us to follow. Because if we could all just together kind of hit the reset button, kind of start with a blank slate, try as best as you can if you were raised in church and have some of these weird notions about church and what it means to follow Jesus, try as best you can to push them down, start with a blank slate, and let's just start with the Gospels. There's a part in the New Testament called the Gospels, which is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And if you read the Gospels, you get a completely different picture of what following Christ means and what discipleship and walking with Christ means in our lives. So I want us to do that over the next few weeks. Start with the blank slate. Let's start today. We're going to dig into Matthew a little bit today and go from there, because the Gospels paint this picture of God and walking with God as completely relational. And I know that sounds hokey and weird. How can you have a relationship with someone you can't see, someone who, you know, I can't take them to coffee, I can't go to lunch with them? How do you have a relationship? Well, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to let somebody smarter than me do that in the next couple weeks. We're going to unpack that a little bit. But that's the way the Gospels paint this picture of walking with God, is as a relationship. And there are some images that Jesus used as we read through the Gospels, and they're all relationship-based. He talked a lot about a father and a child, that he came to reveal God to us and to show us what it was like to walk with God. And I don't know how many father and child relationships are very healthy if it's all just based on you do this, 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 and this, and I will call you my son. That's not a very healthy relationship, and so I apologize if you had one of those. I did not, but most healthy father-child relationships are built on grace and love, and there are some rules and stuff mixed in there. It's you know, some things that you need to do. But it's built on love and grace. Jesus, he also talked about a vine and a branch. There again, it's a relationship. You know, nothing's going to sprout on a vine without it being connected. Nothing's going to sprout on the branch without it being connected to the vine. So there's a relationship happening there. There's a mutual benefit kind of thing going on with the vine and the branch. And then one that we may not truly understand in our day and time, but back then it made great sense, is shepherd and sheep. Jesus talked a lot about he was the good shepherd and his sheep know his voice. And that was the way it was back then. Shepherd who had these sheep that they were tending and watching over the sheep, they knew who their shepherd was. When he called them from far away in a field, those sheep understood and recognized that voice, and they would come. I know that's a weird one for us in our day and time, but for them, that's the way Jesus communicated that it's a relationship that he was talking about. It wasn't a list of do's and don'ts. It wasn't a game of Jesus says this and Jesus says that. It was a relationship. And so one story that we're going to talk about today comes to us in Matthew, the first gospel, and it's about Matthew. So he wrote this story about himself in Matthew, and it's found in chapter 9 of Matthew. And we're going to kind of read through that together, so if you want to turn there in your Bibles or find it on your app, or we'll have it up on the screens too, just for you to follow along as we read it. And we're just going to read it together, read how Matthew encountered Jesus and began this relationship. And hopefully at the end of this talk, we'll be able to kind of see ourselves and to see how simple it is when Jesus just gives us that command to follow. So let's dig in. Matthew 9, verse 9. It says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. Now I want to pause right there for a second because this is a big deal. You know, anybody like taxes? No, yeah, I think that got as quiet as I thought it might. So when you think about taxes, we think it's bad. Can I tell you it's even worse in their day? Because I want to give you a little background on these tax collectors that Matthew was. These tax collectors were actually Jewish citizens, so they were a part of the culture and the fabric of the everyday comings and going. But they were Jewish citizens that Rome, who was in control and getting taxes, Rome would hire these people, these Jewish citizens, to do their dirty work, essentially. You go in, you collect the taxes, and it'll be all good. So Matthew essentially was working for Rome, who had reign over Israel. So he was a Jewish citizen collecting these taxes. And I want to tell you, he could do whatever he wanted to, really, because at the end of the day, the only thing that mattered to Rome was that they got their cut. So Matthew, he could have charged way more than they thought he could for a fish tax or a loaf tax or a pebble, walking on my pebble street tax, or your sandals aren't tied tight tax. I mean, there's all kind of taxes. And Matthew, he could have charged whatever he wanted to as long as he gave Rome his fair share. So this is a big deal because this guy was in some shady, lucrative, but shady work because he could charge whatever he wanted to. So he's sitting in this tax booth, and here comes Jesus. And here's what Jesus says. He said to him, follow me. Now, Jesus, when he approached this, he sees this shady guy collecting taxes. He could have said anything in the world to this guy. You know what I probably would have said if I were Jesus? Shame on you, Matthew, treating your fellow people in this manner. I rebuke you. That's probably what I would have said. How dare you collect taxes and be the shady human being that you are? But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus walks up to this guy in this crooked business and says, follow me. That's the simplicity of the call that Jesus gives to Matthew, and it's the simplicity of the call that he gives to you and to me today. Follow me. And it says in Matthew, he rose and he followed him. It's amazing. See, Jesus, he could have said anything in the world, but he chose those words carefully and on purpose. Follow me. Let's read on and see what happens. Verse 10. Matthew chapter 9, verse 10, it says, and as Jesus reclined at the table. Now, hold on, I'm going to stop right here because Jesus encounters him at a tax booth. We see that whole thing go down. Follow me. Matthew gets up. Okay, follow you. Where are we going, Jesus? Well, let's just go to your house. Jesus did this a lot. Anybody remember Zacchaeus? Wee little man up in a tree. Come down and we'll go to your house and eat. Jesus did this a lot. So he meets Matthew. He says, follow me. Where are we going? Let's just go to your house, Matthew. Okay, we'll go to my house. So they go, and it says, as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors. Oh, now it's getting deep. Because Jesus, not only is he encountering one shady character in a lucrative, shady business, now it says there are many tax collectors. He's met Matthew, and now he's got all his buddies, his dirty friends, all gathered around at the house, and Jesus is kicked back, relaxed, reclined at the table. There are many tax collectors and sinners. Now, I thought this was funny because in those days, this is how bad tax collecting was. You weren't even lumped in with sinners. You had your own category. There are tax collectors and sinners. You know, so sinners are here, and tax collectors, that's the bottom of the barrel, man. That's the worst of the worst. You do not want to be a tax collector. I might be a sinner, but I am not a dirty tax collector. So there are many tax collectors and sinners that came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. So we see Jesus meet Matthew, say, follow me. They go to Matthew's house, and Jesus, he's laid back, reclining at the table with all of Matthew's buddies and friends and these tax collectors and sinners. And it's a crazy situation. And something stood out to me as I was reading that, because what it reveals to us about Jesus is that Jesus was extremely comfortable with people who were nothing like him. And I don't know if I could say that about myself as I attempt to follow Jesus. And in a bigger picture, I don't know if I could say that about the Big C church. Are we as comfortable as Jesus was with people who are nothing like us. Because that's the call to follow, is to be like Jesus and to take on the attitude of Jesus. And we see here that Jesus, he apparently was extremely comfortable with people who were nothing like him. Because it doesn't say he was pacing around looking out the window hoping nobody saw him at Matthew's house having dinner with all these tax collectors and sinners, checking his watch saying, oh, how long do I have to be here? No, it doesn't say that. It says he was completely comfortable. And if you read the verse, it says he reclined. He reclined. Anybody ever reclined at a table? Just me? Okay. No, he reclined. He was completely and extremely comfortable with people who were nothing like him. And then on the flip side of that, it also shows us not only was Jesus comfortable with them, but people who were nothing like Jesus were extremely comfortable with him. They weren't put off. They weren't like, oh, I got to get cleaned up. I got to make sure I got on my Sunday best before I go meet Jesus. I got to make sure. No, they were just themselves. They were having dinner at their buddy Matthew's house, and they were completely comfortable just kicking it with Jesus. As he was laid back at the table, they were having a good time. Let's read on. Let's see what happens in the story. 9:11. It says, and when the Pharisees, oh, here we go. It's going to get good here, right? When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? This isn't in the verse, but I think they were just jealous. Why is he eating with them? He's never offered to come to my house and eat. That's my own paraphrase. And this is the way it is sometimes. When we see people rubbing shoulders with people we think they shouldn't, when they see Jesus rubbing shoulders with the tax collectors and sinners of his day, the do people, the people who are playing the Jesus says game, they get a little offended. They don't understand it. Because they think, hey, I'm doing Jesus says. I'm doing everything Jesus says I do. I do this, I check my list, I've got this, I've got it all cleaned up. And he's not coming to my house, he's with them. What's up with that? Why is he eating with tax collectors and sinners? Let's read on. Verse 12. It says, but when he heard it, now we don't know how close these people were. Maybe they were hanging out by the window just trying to catch a peek. I don't know. We don't get that insight in the story. But it says, when he heard it, talking about Jesus, he said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. So Jesus somehow, he catches wind of what these Pharisees are asking to his disciples, to his followers, to the people who are following him, and he catches wind of it, and his response is pretty simple. He says, those who are well, they don't need a physician. It's the sick people that need help. You want to know why I'm in here hanging out with these people? It's because they need help. You should be okay if you feel like you're playing Jesus says correctly and you've got it all in order. Why are you worried about it? It's the sick who need help. And so Jesus, that's what he says. And I love this because what it reveals to us about Jesus and following Jesus is that people who are willing to admit that they have a need, people who are willing to stand up and say, you know what, I do struggle, I do have a need. People who are willing to admit that they need help and have a need are prime candidates to be followers of Jesus Christ. Because that's who he was hanging out with. That's where he was reclined. That's the party he was attending, were those who were in need. Let's read on. Verse 13. And he continues to talk to the Pharisees. He says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I came not to call the righteous, but to call sinners. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. I came to call not the righteous, but to call sinners. So Jesus, he's continuing with the Pharisees. Because Jesus, what he's doing here is he's standing in the middle of the religious system of that day, and he's beginning to paint a completely different picture. Because the religious system of that day looked a little like this. Because the Pharisees, they said, here's the deal. You get cleaned up, you change yourself, you get it all together, and then you can come and join us. You can come be a part of our party. You can come to our temple. You can come do our practices. You change, and then you can join. And in the middle of that religious system, Jesus pops on the scene, shows up at a tax collector booth, utters two words, follow me, and the whole system changes because Jesus' deal is this, join me, and you will change. Join me and your life will be changed. You don't have to get cleaned up and fixed up and have all the answers and have it all figured out to join me. Just join me and I will walk with you in this relationship that we're in. I will teach you. I will guide you. I will help you as you follow me. And the thing that's beautiful about that to me personally, I don't know if you're like me, but I do struggle. I do have hard days. Days are better than others. Some are worse than others. And for me, I find great comfort in the fact that Jesus says, you know what, join me, follow me, we'll figure it out, we'll get through it. Follow me. And it's encouraging because no matter where you are, no matter if you feel like Matthew, the tax collecting, no good, rotten, sorry person, mooching off of his own people, or if you feel like the person who's playing the Jesus says all perfectly and right, and you're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, and you've got it all figured out. No matter where you are in that spectrum, the thing I love about Jesus is the invitation to both is exactly the same. And it's the two words, follow me. That's the picture that Jesus is painting of what it means to follow, what it means to be a disciple, what it means to be in a relationship with him. It's about following. It's not about having all the answers and having all the boxes checked. It's about following. It's not about getting yourself cleaned up and getting it all together. It's about following me. That's why Jesus says, keep your eyes fixed on me. I'm the author and the finisher and the perfecter of your faith. Follow me. I'm getting a little preachy, I'm sorry. This is supposed to just be a setup. And so as I wind down, I want to talk just a little bit about some things that, as I was reading through this week and thinking about what I was going to say, just some things that stood out to me about this passage of Scripture, just these 4 verses that we're going to kind of unpack together over the next few weeks. And so I just want to share these thoughts with you, and hopefully you'll be able to grab them and take them with you. And because the bottom line is that no matter where you are, the invitation is to follow. And the first thing that stood out to me as I read this story as a whole, first thing is that being a sinner doesn't disqualify you. Thank goodness for that. Being a sinner doesn't disqualify you. In fact, it's quite the opposite if you read this story. Being a sinner doesn't disqualify you. It's actually a prerequisite to follow me. Jesus doesn't discount you because you're a sinner, because you've made some mistakes, because you've messed up a few times. No, he says, you know what? It's because of that I'm issuing these 2 words, follow me. Get in relationship with me. Walk with me. You don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to clean yourself up. Just join me, and we'll worry about the change as we walk along. Being a sinner doesn't disqualify you. It's a prerequisite to follow. Second thing that stood out to me in the whole story is that being an unbeliever doesn't disqualify you. Because as you read through the Gospels, as we're going to do over the next few weeks, you're going to see some stories of even Jesus' 12 disciples, some of those guys that were his tight-knit, his crew, all the way up until the end. Some of those struggled with unbelief. They struggled with whether or not to believe this was really happening. Even after Jesus had died, was buried, resurrected, shows back up in this room, there's one of them. Anybody remember his name? Thomas, doubting Thomas. Even then, I'm not sure I believe this whole thing's real, Jesus. You're kind of here, but let me touch your side and feel your hand. All the way to the end, seeing all that, there's still somebody in his posse that's like, not real sure, I'm kind of on the fence here. And so being an unbeliever doesn't disqualify you. Makes you a candidate. Third thing that stands out to me is that the invitation to follow, it's not an invitation to a list or a game of Jesus says or something to get yourself in order. It's an invitation into a relationship. It's completely different than the Pharisees had put out there of change and join me, to where Jesus is saying, join me and we'll work on the change. Because it's a relationship. As we were talking through this first setups series, I wanted a big, nice visual, something really creative. It didn't happen. But we did come. Matt shared a story. He was like, it's kind of like if you went to see the Grand Canyon, or any of these other just natural wonders of the world, and you've never been there before, and you wanted to experience it and make sure you got to where you needed to be in the Grand Canyon, walking down to the valley and seeing the river and all this stuff, you probably wouldn't try it alone. But they have these things that you can hire and rent called guides. And that's really what Jesus is offering here is, look, you don't have to have it figured out. You don't even have to know where you're going. You don't even know how to get there. All you have to do is follow me because I'm the tour guide. I'm going to get you there. I'm going to take care of you. And in this relationship, as we walk together through whatever may come, all you have to do is follow me. And lastly, the fourth thing, and this is probably more for me maybe than anybody else, is that when we follow, it forces me to focus on where I am instead of where other people are not. See, when my only concern is following Jesus, keeping my eyes fixed on him, I'm not worried about who's keeping up and who may be making mistakes over here and who may be messing up behind me. I'm not even concerned about that because my only concern in this life is to follow him, to keep my eyes fixed on him. I'm not concerned about anybody else around me in my walk with Christ. I'm not worried about if they're doing it right or they're doing it wrong. I'm worried about following Jesus. So when we follow, it forces us to focus on where we are and not where other people are not. So those are my takeaways from this story as we kind of unpack this together over the next few weeks. So I want to leave you kind of hanging today. So there's a question that I ask myself at the end of this, and I'm just going to throw it out there for you. And over the next few weeks, we're going to kind of unpack this a little bit more as we walk through this together. So the question I want to leave you with today is, am I following? Are you following? Where are you in this spectrum? Are you over here and just you don't care about anything? You're doing your own thing, like Matthew, just hanging out at your own tax booth, whatever it may be. Or maybe you're over here and you feel like you're playing the game just the way it should be played. You abide by all the rules. Wherever you are, the question is, are you following? Because that's the simple call. It's not easy. I don't want to paint a picture that says all you got to do is this, because it's not easy. It's hard. It's a daily process to walk and follow, but the call is the same and it's simple. It's the same one that Jesus gave Matthew, follow me. So the question I want to leave us with today is, are we following? Are you following? Let me pray for us, and then Matt's going to come up and tell you about something cool we're doing as a church together as we walk through this series. So let me pray for us. God, I thank you for your grace, for your love, for just your simple call to follow you. And I don't have to have all the answers, and we collectively don't have to have all the answers, and we don't have to have it all figured out. All we have to do is take the first step, just as Matthew did, and follow you. The invitation is simple, and it's not to a list of do's and don'ts, but it's to a relationship. It's to a daily walk, to a daily abiding with you. And so, God, help us as we ask this question, are we following you? Is that the desire of our hearts when we wake up in the morning, is the first thing on our minds following you? Help us to work through that and process it individually, and help it to flesh itself out collectively so that this place would become a place of healing to those who are hurting, to those who are sick, to those who are in need. But it all begins when we follow you. It's in your name I pray, Jesus. Amen.
We hope you've enjoyed engaging in our worship experience. Everything we do at Journey is to help make a difference in people's lives. If God has been moving and working in your life, we would love to hear your story. You can share it with us at mystory@thejourneyonline.com. If you would like to invest in the ministry and mission at Journey Church, you can give online at thejourneyonline.com. Thank you for investing in the lives that are changing at Journey Church.